everyone's at the lake, and I assume that you have in South Central Washington your own version of the lake. Might be the river, might be a mountain. So thanks for not being there. Thanks for being here. Again, my name is Patrick Jones, the director of the Institute for Public Policy and Economics at Eastern. I've been your facilitator here for a few years, and we are marching very quickly along to operationalize work. But before we start with our presentations, we need to do our introductions, and instead of asking who came from the furthest away, because I think I know who did that, I'd like to see if you can tell the group what your air quality is today. Whether it's good, whether it's unhealthy, whether it's moderately healthy, if you know. If you don't know, don't worry about it. But I'll just say in Spokane, we're borderline between unhealthy and very unhealthy. So not too many people going outside in Spokane. So we'll start at the back with the woman in turquoise. And please speak up.
My name is Susan. I'm from Planned Parenthood, and I'm in the Tri-Cities that's probably unhealthy to very, very unhealthy.
Okay. That's Dr. Person.
Amy Person, I'm Franklin Health District, and our air quality is unhealthy.
Unhealthy, okay.
Sean, Franklin Health District.
All right, yeah, we know that. Okay.
Chad Farmaker, Franklin Health District.
Okay. All right.
Kirk Williamson, Ben Franklin Community Health Alliance. Did you mean the air quality inside my head or out?
I'll ask you that in 2 hours.
Nicole Watson, Franklin County Medical Society. Healthcare, and I am from Yakima. Shelley Little from the Franklin Health District, also the Pediatric Transforming Clinical Practice Grant.
All right, thank you. All right. Okay, is this your first meeting, the two of you?
Can I say something?
You may.
I can't hear people on the phone.
Is that Liz?
Yes.
Hi, Liz. Well, we're going to do our best. It's a big room, and I think when we get into the presentations, you'll hear a little better. But
Okay. Just ask people to speak up and speak slowly, both.
All right. Okay, Bertha, you're on for that one.
Bertha Lopez with Virginia Mason Memorial in Yakima, and unhealthy, and I can't go out bike riding, so it's a bummer.
Jimmy Anderson, Air Facility, Yakima.
Becky Gross, assistant here.
Okay. And Kat?
Hey, Community Health Plan of Washington, and I am based out of Seattle, and it is also an unhealthy air quality in Seattle.
Wow.
And I'm on Plan of Washington, and I am based out of Tri-Cities.
All right, so we'll go this gentleman right here.
Well, according to Breezometer, the air quality is 27 and it's up to 50, it's good. So, but I don't believe it. So, according to the measures.
You wouldn't know by looking at the air. So, and your name and rank and serial number? Cadline, okay. Jack?
I'm Jack Davidson with Northwest Rural Health Network. I'm from Spokane, and I have the air quality index on speed dial because it's been that kind of summer already. And we're at 155 this morning.
155? Okay. From Lewis?
I'm Barbara Dean from Ward.
All right.
I'm Dulcie Field from CBHA, representing our Cornell Clinic. I came from Oklahoma State. We're unhealthy as well.
Okay.
Even from CBHA as well. Samantha Freiberg, Quality Behavioral Health in Clarkston, and it's unhealthy. Monica Quinn, Quality Behavioral Health.
All right, go ahead.
Dr. Rivera with Molina Healthcare. This week I've been on the Olympic Peninsula, Seattle, Yakima, and the Tri-Cities is bad everywhere.
Even the Olympic Peninsula?
I went.
Wow. Ruben?
Ruben Penalta, Greater Columbia GCACH, and yeah, this summer is the same as the last 2 summers. And this week I've been looking ahead after work. Oh, I can't wait for this book to go away.
Yeah, sometimes that happens.
Gotta do it.
Yeah. All right, right here, please.
Becky Cole, Greater Columbia.
Oh, Becky, we haven't met. Okay.
I'm Diane Halo with Greater Columbia.
Okay, Rhonda.
I'm Ronnie Batchelor, Lutheran Community Services, Community Health Worker, and Effective Counselor. The Greater Columbia Board. Air quality, I have my parakeets outside and they are dead.
Yeah, what year?
Down in the mines, they said.
Oh, the
Okay, birds are dead in the cage.
There you go. Yeah, we like that industry.
You're in the mic, yeah.
Chuck?
Chuck Eaton with Blue Mountain Heart to Heart for recovering our nicotine-dependent person. The air quality is terrible.
Yeah, yeah.
Ryan Karsbeck, Richland Fire Department.
Have you gotten any more calls out due to asthma and people like Chuck?
Yeah, we've seen it out there, it's breathing, really good.
Fire on the south end.
What?
Fire on the south end.
Well, yeah.
Okay,
Michelle Crowley, Hospital Fire Department.
all right, and then we'll start at the last row here, first row.
Jocelyn Pedrosa, Yakima Neighborhood Health.
Michelle Sullivan, Yakima Neighborhood Health Services.
Neighborhood Health. And Rhonda from Yakima Neighborhood Health Services. And in spite of the unhealthy air quality, community health centers all across the state of Washington this week are having outdoor festivals.
Yes, I've noticed it. Things like that are going on despite the weather, right? I hope you're wearing masks. You brought a team today, Rhonda, so.
Martin Sanchez, Greater Columbia GCACH,
Columbia ACH. Carol Moser, Executive Director, Greater Columbia ACH.
Deputy Director of Greater Columbia.
Right here in front.
Ashleen Fernandez. Lauren Johnson, Greater Columbia.
Okay, now, those of you online, first of all, if you put your, after you're done introducing yourselves, please put your phone on mute. And we'll start with Liz, since she's already announced herself.
This is Liz Whitaker, Kittitas County Public Health Department. And our air quality has improved this morning to unhealthy.
Oh, boy. Okay. Next. Anybody else on the line?
Kevin Martin with Kittitas Valley Healthcare, and just echoing Liz, if we get another 3 points, we actually pass out of unhealthy. But having grown up in Southern California in the 60s, it's kind of good to see what you breathe. You don't have to take it on faith.
Well, I guess we're becoming Southern Californians then, Kevin.
It seems like it.
Anybody else on the line?
Yes, this is Reese from Spokane. I'm the practice facilitator for Better Health Together region and Greater Columbia for the PTCPI.
All right, thanks for checking in. If you need a ride, talk to Jack Davies and me sometime, and we'll bring you down here in person. Anybody else?
Hi, this is Corey Blythe from Southeast Washington, and air quality is iffy.
Yeah, I think we've heard that from Clarkston. Okay. Anybody else? If not, we'll get started. We have somebody who slipped in here at the last moment. Would you like to just introduce yourself, please? Okay, thank you, Jean. So here's the agenda you have in front of you. Now we're going to break the agenda. We're going to start with what is last and do it after the report from staff, and I assume that's going to be Carol giving the staff report.
Well, we'll all participate.
You'll all participate? Okay. And then Wes is going to walk us through this semi-annual report that the staff has labored over so hard in the month of July, and to the degree that they couldn't hold a meeting. So, we'll start with Carol, and then Carol, you'll introduce your team as needed, and, we will jump into then the agenda with, Mike Hinmarsh, I hope around 9:30, and, we're gonna spend about an hour with Mike, and it's a medium-sized, slide deck, and we're gonna have hopefully lots of questions for you from Mike. And then we're going to have Bertha, and looks like Lily did not make it, Bertha, today? Okay, so you're flying solo and talking about their chronic care models that you are engaged in with Lily. And that's the agenda.
So we lied a little bit. We are going to cover the STAR, but we're first going to take you through the Greater Columbia ACH report, and this will be told by all of our staff who contribute articles to the report. So the lead article is obviously the organizations that we have selected for practice transformation. Wes has his version, I have my version, but if you think about a great movie that you've seen, it always starts with a really great screenplay, or a screenwriter writes a great script. And we have really laid the foundation, I think, for a really great plan by choosing the patient-centered medical home model of care as our screenwriter. It creates a great framework and backdrop for all of our actors and supporting actors to play a part in. The organizations that we have selected for our initial cohort are all primary care behavioral health centered. These are our main and primary actors for the initial cohort. That's just the beginning, because any great movie requires a lot of different players to play supporting roles. We haven't quite figured out that next step yet, but we have identified the initial cohort that we are going to be working with, which are all of those organizations that you see on the screen. And so I don't feel like I need to talk about all of them, but you will find that Lauren, on the very back of your report, has identified where these main cohort organizations reside. So you'll see that there's broad representation across our 9-county region and the Yakima Nation. We're going to, Ruben, did you want to talk about the Yakima Nation, some of the work that we're doing with them?
Well, we've been very, very active with the Yakima Nation. In the last 2 months, we've held about 6 meetings. Some of them specifically with the Yakima Nation. The others involve Austria-Toppenish, trying to develop a partnership there to address several issues, concerns within the community. So Joe Bella can probably add some more detail. He's been hosting that program.
Can you speak up?
We started these meetings with the Yakima Nation based on some needs that they voiced to us. We are starting a 15 ENT bed there in the hospital, and that's a detox program. And so we are addressing some of the things that we've seen in terms of their ER response to folks coming in. And so we're trying to work that partnership and developing that continuity of care with them. And so in the last, we've had at least 4 meetings, and very productive meetings, and a lot of things came out of their issues surrounding this, care, transportation issues, and other things that we discussed. So we plan to continue to meet with them, and we're hoping to develop that partnership where we are working together in the community to make sure that the folks that we serve are on a path of recovery, a sustainable recovery.
Thank you, Joe, and thanks to Austria-Toppenish for that collaboration. Why don't we talk a little bit about practice transformation? Where's Sam? Here's Sam.
Practice transformation efforts, we've selected our clinics, and we'll be going out to assess and look into what kind of needs and resources are wanted for the goals of those different clinics. So definitely we have 2 practice navigators that are queuing that up, and that's Jenna and Martine. And they can tell you that we've already been, the gates, floodgates have opened, we've been out to clinics, and we're traveling all the time for the past 3 weeks. You guys want to add anything to that? Sure.
we've been, can everybody hear me?
Stand up, Jen.
All right. We've been going out to some of the sites, mostly we've been working with behavioral health organizations, trying to help them focus on their integrated managed care transition. So we'll go out, we'll do a MEHAP assessment, a billing and toolkit self-assessment, but we are literally booked for August. So we're booking people in September now for the priority organizations that you saw on the screen. That's really exciting. Everybody's been receptive and open, and we call ourselves besties, hand holders, whatever we used to be called. Staff, whatever. So, yeah, it's been fun.
Our staff has been working really hard in trying to get our practices ready, and I think that we are going to definitely be ready by the beginning of the year for fully integrated managed care. So thank you to our practice transformation team. Becky, do you want to talk a little bit about the financial executive portal and the money that we're doling out?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So, this is an exciting part for me also. This group has been amazing. We are finally handing out some money, as you see from the screen. Diane and I have been still working with some of the providers that haven't quite gotten their accounts set up in the portal that I think our list is narrowed down a lot. We'll have some more payments going out this week to, the next week to providers that haven't gotten their bank accounts going. And once we get some of the work that they on our team are doing, we'll have more money going out. So it's exciting for us to be able to share the money with you guys.
Right. That's the whole goal,
Yes.
is to make money so that we can spread it out to our partners. We're going to hear a little bit from Diane Halo. She's our new manager for integrated managed care. You can give us an update, Diane?
Sure. So we have 17 providers that are going into the mid adopters for the integrated managed care. And we've actually reached out to all of them. We have been to 14 of their clinics. We have completed all of their MEHAPs, their toolkits, already did their transformation plans, and they're actually, now once the contracts are signed, we're ready to start being able to provide the money that they've earned. And so the next step is just to get those contracts signed, and then we'll keep meeting. We have 3 work groups that we have. We have a provider readiness work group that meets bi-weekly, and then also a integrated managed care communications group that is providing the communications that will go out to the consumers here once the change is going to be taking place. And so we're working with the MPOs and the healthcare authority to get the right wording so the consumers don't get too confused and know what's really going on, so that we can communicate it to them. And then the early warning systems work group is there to help us know if there's anything that's amiss once we do go live, to make sure that there's not any more access to care is okay, or just tracking some of the ED utilization and being able to see if there's any issues as we're moving into this managed care. So it's exciting, we're getting there. I think the providers are all getting ready for this, and I think we're on the right track. I think the providers are all on board, and it's exciting to see that all the changes happening.
So for those of you just a little bit of a higher level, the integrated managed care, so that the state legislature passed a law that by 2020, all of the behavioral health organizations that contracted with SUD or mental health providers would be going into these managed care contracts. So come 2020, all of our mental health and SUD providers will contract directly with our MCO partners, Community Health Plan of Washington, AmeriGroup, Coordinated Care, and Molina in this region. We had an option to be a mid-adopter or some organizations, actually some ACHs were early adopters. We chose to be a mid-adopter, which allowed some funding to go to our behavioral health and organizations to receive funding. So by the act of that decision by the Board of Directors of Greater Columbia Behavioral Health Organization, there's funding that has been set aside for these organizations to get ready, because you just don't start contracting with an MCO at the drop of a hat. There's all sorts of processes, billing systems that have to be set up. And so that's why we are doing this work, is to get our behavioral health providers ready for that. Carol, can I add that we are also doing their transition and their contingency planning for them as well, so it's been really, as Jenna said, that it's really been a hand-holding, and that's what we're here for, so please reach out to us and let us know what we can do for you in an effort to make sure that this transition is smooth.
Thank you, Sam. Want to talk about our new thing?
This is Liz. Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Why is United Healthcare not in the list of managed care organizations? When I look on the HCA website, United Healthcare is supposedly in most of the counties in our region.
So I could ask Teresa or Kat to relay that, but it was basically a competitive bid for services in each of the ACH regions, and not all ACH regions ended up with the 5 MCOs that were previously in their region. So Spokane ended up with 3, we ended up with 4. I think Pierce still has 5, Snohomish still has 5, and King County still has 5. It was a decision by the Healthcare Authority.
So this matrix that I'm looking at for 2018 is not correct?
Correct for.
Come on up, Kat.
Or he can join me. Link arms down the aisle.
Oh, just so the matrix for 2018 would be correct, because 2018 we are still in a space where we have Apple Health, which is covering physical health to mild to moderate behavioral health, and then moving into mild to moderate mental health, and then you have the behavioral health organization that is covering severe and persistent mental illness and then substance use disorder. Going into 2019, that's when the transition will happen. So United is currently still operating within the region, and there will be a transition in 2019 to the apparently successful bidders after we pass our readiness review.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. Okay, now we get to the bling. So I'm displaying some of that. We've been out and about a lot, but we also have a really big toy that we've been blinging up.
So in July, we got a new leased car. We're pretty excited about it. We put some signage up on it, so if you see us on the road, make sure to wave. Mainly our practice transformation team has been using it. It's already been all over the state, and I'm sure it'll continue being all over the state. I'm pretty sure it's going to Pullman tomorrow. So we've had fun with it. We're hoping to get another one eventually because our team is constantly traveling. So yeah, make sure to wave to us.
When we did that financial analysis, this was so much better than paying people per mileage, and then we were putting lots of miles on our own cars. So this is really a cost savings measure, because I know we have a couple of board members here. I don't want them to panic. So, yeah, this savings measure. We're going to talk a little bit now about the semi-annual report. This is a heavy lift. Wes and I thank everybody who contributed to this. But we kind of came up with some 4 slides that are our ultimate conclusions, and Wes is going to take us through those.
Can you guys hear me? I like using the microphone because my voice is not very loud. Let's go to the next slide. Or this is not it. Let's go to the one that, no, it's not this. This one. Try that one. Yeah, close enough. Okay. So, as you all know, we conducted a current state assessment back in May. It went out to organizations who originally sent to us letters of interest in September of last year through the beginning of this year. The main goal of the CSA was to identify gaps, barriers, and assets in existing services throughout our delivery system or delivery systems. The big question we wanted to answer was, how would our partner provider network want us to implement programs and services in the GCACH to support their program implementation? That's kind of a long sentence, but essentially what we wanted to find out is it helps us identify how to do our work based on the assessment. Let's go to the next slide. So the current state assessment, as I said, it went out in May, went out to 78 providers. We received back 57 CSAs completed, which was a response rate of around 73%. That was a very high response rate. Of course, there was a stipend tied to it. So to explain the process, the LOI led to the CSA. That was analyzed. That also included some market information that was provided by Sam and Carol and I, and things that we've collected since we've been part of that process. That led to the development of the report that was put into the semi-annual report, or the SAR. That was sent out. That was due at the end of July. That was one of our big deliverables for 2018. We also produced another report that related to that, which I call the tables report. I'm not going to bring it up, but it should be in your packet or sent out electronically to you. That has a distillation of some of the questions in the SAR that allowed for quantitative analysis, and it was broken out into sections, and there's a description with each section. That was further distilled down into a PowerPoint presentation, so there's distillation, that went to the practice transformation work group, which met recently. They looked at the PowerPoint presentation, and through that whole process, all that reporting and analysis, we came up with 4 broad conclusions, which we're going to share today. 3 of them relate to needs, and 1 relates to a confirmation. Next slide. So the first broad conclusion, these are our high-level drivers of success. Clinical care management for high-needs, high-risk populations is essential. As we talked about last year, in any population, around 5% of that population drives around half of the healthcare costs. 10% drives around 70% of the healthcare costs. In our ACH, that is equivalent to, for 5%, that's equivalent to about 10 to 15,000 individuals. Those individuals account for a lot of the healthcare utilization that we experience. If we are to be successful, it's important that we identify those individuals, come up with strategies to deal with them, and then manage their care. They're not a homogeneous population. They're a broad mix of socio-demographic characteristics, clinical characteristics. They include people with severe persistent mental illness, those who are disabled, people with SUD issues, the homeless. There's a lot of individuals that fit into that category. So what are the strategies? We believe that to effectively manage that population, it requires a nurse care manager of some sort, who will assess, plan, coordinate, implement, and evaluate patient care continuously. These individuals in that patient population need continuous management of their care. The options are that we've identified, and this may not be an exclusive list. The first option would be to refer to one of our great care coordination organizations, Consistent Care, Signals Health, Aging Long-Term and Care, and there may be some other organizations that are tied into that as well. That's option A. Option B, there can be clinic-based clinical nurse case managers who are devoted to this sort of a functionality. And there may be some other options tied to that as well. So there's a menu of options that provider organizations can choose from. Health IT will help cement this together. Mobile services is another option. Community paramedicine is another option. Something that's not included on there also might include chaplaincy as well. They may fit into this mix. Again, there's many other organizations that might tie into this in some way. Health IT can help cement this together. We have a partial strategy right now to help secure direct secure messaging for provider organizations, pre-manage. We have a pilot project that we've talked about in Ellensburg and perhaps some other things. The big question is, what is the sustainable funding model or models? Do the provider organizations bring this in-house? Do they coordinate and contract with other organizations? And what is the role of the managed care organizations? We're not going to answer that right now, but this is a big question that needs to be addressed. We are going to include in the practice transformation implementation work plans, you can think of these as change plans. These will be tied to the contracts that go along with the participating provider organizations. It will be stipulated that there needs to be a strategy in place for the management of high-risk patients. That includes a strategy for identifying those individuals, either through population health management tools or some other measure, and then a strategy for managing that care. Next slide.
Broad conclusion number 2, this is another need. This relates to formalized collaborations. This came up again and again, and we're seeing this in the marketplace. Formalized collaborations are needed to support practice transformation and the patient-centered medical home. So the goal is to create those with clinical community linkages. So these might be collaborations between one provider and another, or a provider organization and a social service organization, or a community-based organization, or all of the above. There will be multi-organizational agreements around an outlined care pathway. We've been using the term use cases, which comes from the computer industry, the technology industry. It's essentially a cycle of care. Formalizing what that cycle is, specifically outlining what the patient flow is. And then once that's been identified and there's acceptance among all the participating providers and organizations, then we formalize that through MOUs and contracts. This is a need that exists within all the service areas. How that takes shape, it's going to depend on what the needs are from one delivery system to the next. Again, Health IT can help with this in terms of sharing patient data across providers. One simple example here is timely communication from the hospital back to the community provider in terms of discharge summaries, care plans, and other information. There's a real opportunity in just this one particular use case. Next slide. Third broad conclusion, health workforce capabilities, that is, the skills, training, scope of practice must reflect the needs of the patient-centered medical home. Patient-centered medical home, as we've talked about before, will rely on team-based care. That includes RNs, medical assistants, perhaps care coordinators, pharmacists, maybe nutritionists. It'll depend on the size and the scope of the practice. Those individuals, we will want them to conform to what's required for the patient-centered medical home, which will mean that they will be practicing to the full scope of their license. We've also talked about long-term needs in terms of creating curriculums and defining career pathways that will take somebody from, say, high school to community college to a school of nursing or medical school, so that individuals who want to go into healthcare know the career pathway from the beginning and are more able to follow it. Short-term, providing opportunities that we've identified include some opportunities that came out of the statewide health systems and capacity building partnership. Carroll is part of that. Other ACHs are part of that. Healthcare Authority is part of that. One of the identified training needs relates to cultural sensitivity. Obviously, that's a huge issue for us. Some other training needs that have been identified relate to the opioid project area. This includes medication-assisted treatment training for providers, as well as buprenorphine prescribing waiver training. It would also include the 6 building blocks guideline training and prescription monitoring program for the provider practice. For transitional care, the Interact model has limited implementation across the ACH. However, it's called out as one of our evidence-based approaches. Also, use of the Boost tool, which is a discharge planning tool, which can help prevent readmission, has a lot of opportunities for growth as well. There's also the teach-back method, chronic disease self-management for patients, intentional pregnancy planning, which we saw a presentation from Upstream USA, as well as oral health assessments and fluoride varnish for providers. A particularly important piece of this will be to educate provider practices how to bill for services that relate to the patient-centered medical home that they're not currently billing for. Sam is an expert in this. Martine and Jenna are becoming more experienced in that, and I think that that will provide a revenue model that will promote sustainability. Next slide. Finally, we believe that the patient-centered medical home is the right strategy to be successful under the transformation program. Carol has her metaphor about the screenplay relative to a motion picture. My metaphor relates to a house where PCMH provides the foundation. Added to that are columns that relate to community-based organization, other healthcare providers, care coordination organizations, and the rest. We have to start with primary care medical home because really this starts with primary care. This is where patients are handled. A lot of in fact, most of the pay for performance measures relate to success within the primary care practice. The goal here is to have those organizations that partner with us have 95% of them successfully achieve patient-centered medical home. So a lot of practices are currently doing that. However, we're seeing a lot of variability in terms of implementation. With that variability, we've identified some opportunities for growth. Some of the justification that we provide to this, a more comprehensive coordinated approach to change management, PCMH, within the primary care practice. And when I say primary care, I need to be careful here because that could include primary care embedded in behavioral health agencies, where those primary care practitioners take on a panel of patients. They're not just providing acute care services. They're actually managing the overall needs, including chronic care management for those patients. It's foundational to the success of the demonstration. The patient-centered medical home can be linked to enhanced Medicaid reimbursement, as I just talked about, and we believe it's needed for success in the emerging value-based payment marketplace. Ultimately, the goal here excuse me, is to help providers be more successful under VBP, which is coming fast and furious. The next justification, PCMH ties all four of our project areas together into a single portfolio. Original research around the chronic care model today, we'll actually hear from Mike Heinmarsh, who was with the McCall Institute. He worked with Ed Wagner. He was part of the group that actually developed the chronic care model that led into the patient-centered medical home. The research that was done there shows that success here will drive the paper performance measures. In the New York Delivery System Reform Incentive Program, their experience was that practices that emphasize change management were 6 times more likely to achieve outcome measures. Highly significant. Finally, PCMH practices seem to be more attractive to primary care practices when they go through their recruiting process. So that's a nice added-on bonus. With that, as we've talked about earlier, in our initial implementations here and our assessments, we're getting a lot of rave positive feedback that people welcome this model and what we're trying to achieve. So after this presentation, after this here, this slide deck is the rest of the analysis that went to the practice transformation work group. And I'm going to stop there for questions.
Good. Yeah, we've got a couple, 3 minutes for questions. There's a lot of, those 4 slides are pretty dense. So what you say there, Wes, if you've got questions about any one of the 4 slides, be it workforce, be it the first 1 or 2 that describe patient-centered medical home.
Those slides are different than the ones were sent out in the packet. Are we going to get these slides too?
If they're not in the packet, they'll be in the website.
Okay, thanks.
And if you have problems accessing those, we've made continuous changes to this part of the presentation, and there were some updates. And if people are not able to access these, please contact Lauren. We'll either send it to you or direct you to the website.
Yeah, just I think more a comment than a question on the slide about care coordination. I think that one of the things that we find is that so many of the issues that our clients need help with are related to social determinants, and there aren't enough nurses to go around. And so I would not limit the care coordination to nurses, because there are a lot of community health workers and other kinds of people that can help with care coordination besides nurses, because there aren't enough nurses to go around. So that's the only comment I would add.
So it's a good observation. Okay.
Have you done any kind of informal assessment of our partners that are doing part of this work with PCMH models and to see what the barriers, because obviously there's the different views of the model, and sometimes there's some resistance to some of, or some challenges around PCMH model. So have you had any feedback from, maybe it's Jenna. So maybe Jenna and Martin can give some feedback around if there's some resistance around PCMH models or some challenges around that to really get to the outcomes that we want to get.
So the question is, in our implementation of patient-centered medical home, has there been some pushback around aspects of the model?
So we've talked about, we've been working mainly with behavioral health, so to speak, to community partners like community-based organizations. We can't say yes or no, but with the places we've been working at have been SUDs, substance use disorder, and behavioral health. There's been a lot of welcoming of integration, but there's also been a need for understanding on both sides of what does this look like. So, for example, we have 4 project areas. One of them is transitional care. And a lot of times when we go to the SUDs, they're like, oh, we don't need that. And then we explain what transitional care is. It's like, oh, well, maybe your patient went to the ED and then they came back to you, or they went to their primary care. They're like, oh, yeah, we want to know that. We want to be able to help that because we can better serve our patients. So I think it's just it's welcome, but there's a need for more education. Is that answers your question?
And it's not a traditional model. We're not going in and actually saying, okay, these are all the elements of a PCMH. We're working with those entities individually, identifying their goals, their needs, their barriers, their resources that are needed, and then we're working on a plan together. Does that help a little bit?
And we got a question over here from Cadillac.
I just want to add something though, Bertha, because I think you get to the heart of the issue on organizational and change management. How do we do that? When we discovered that we had this ability to, bring Sam on board and with that expertise with PCMH and really the driver of this adoption and strategy, part of the work of the staff then was to get together our 18 disciples, or 17 disciples, as part of our practice transformation work group. So we worked very hard to bring on exemplar models like Yakima Neighborhood Health Services, who's been doing PCMH for many years, Yakima Valley Farm Workers Clinic, CHCW. So we had some really exemplar organizations that we brought on that could, speak to the model. And we had this emerging model, this Lord's Health Network that was undergoing it, and now Tri-Cities Community Health. And so we've had these disciples along the way saying, this is actually the right thing to do. Providence, Mark Wakai, who was one of the regional managers, and Brian Sandoval are co-chairing them. So we got buy-in from the very beginning from this practice transformation work group that we were on the right track, because we didn't want to get out, in the middle of this and then all of a sudden we meet this great resistance. And so we've been working really hard to lay the foundation to use this as our foundational strategy. Interestingly enough, so the New York District program used PCMH as the foundation for their change management, for their waiver program. It hasn't been as, visible in the state of Washington. PCMH, according to Patrick, just hasn't, caught on as much in the state of Washington for whatever reason. I think the model has changed dramatically over the last 4 years. It's very flexible. The way our team is implementing it is very flexible, working with each organization. But we are convinced that this is the foundation. This is what's going to provide sustainability to these organizations long after we're gone. They'll have these great business models that they have adopted that achieve the triple aim. So we're really confident that this is the right way to go. All of the organizations that we have signed up with all recognize what we're trying to do. They've all kind of signed on to this, but I guess the proof will be in the pudding when we start contracting with them and asking for some of their change practices. I know that we've been working with the medical group, Memorial Medical Physicians. We talked to you guys just recently about this model, so I think, having this confirmation from a lot of different providers is going to be essential and will create a really great foundation for this to be a good success in our region. We are the only region that's using the PCMH model as our foundation. Everybody else is kind of out there doing change plans. I think this is a little bit more strategic, and I think will be really successful. But it's a good question.
Okay, one more question, and then we better.
I just had a comment on the last slide, and Carol just mentioned as well the AAA. I think one of the things that we can use to or focus on to eliminate or alleviate some of the concerns that people might have. One of the big things that providers are looking at is, okay, we're going to be doing PCMH. What else am I going to have to do? So there's a concern with burnout. So I think what we need to do is maybe not for the paperwork, but for in our mindset, we need to concentrate on the quadruple aim. How are we supporting the people who provide the service is the fourth element that needs to be addressed in this, because we're not going to get buy-in if we don't do that.
And I think that we've tried to incorporate some of that into our model as well. It's a whole person approach, patient-centered. So we take that to heart, and yeah, I think we're trying to achieve that. I want to just take a quick check here. Mike, are you on the phone?
Yes, I am.
Fantastic. So we're going to transition into our next presentation.
So those of you who picked up the packet, I think most of you did, you see the bio of Mike Highmarsh. It's quite compelling. And we feel very lucky to have snagged him for today's meeting. Couldn't come all the way down to the Tri-Cities, but Mike, are you in Vancouver? Are you up in Ottawa or
I'm in Toronto, Ontario.
You're in Toronto. Well, yeah, you're missing lunch because of us. So we'll try to get this going and appreciate your presence with us. If you could go through that slide deck in about 40 minutes, that would make it 10:30 our time, and then we'll have time for questions. And I would guess that some of the same questions that just surfaced in regard to Wes's slides will come out also in the aftermath of your presentation, Mike. So I hope you've got some good answers, and I'm sure you do. So we've got your slides up now. Do you see it on your screen?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. It's the floor is yours.
Okay, wonderful. I'm getting a bit of an echo. Is anyone else?
No, not here.
Okay.
We hear it on the phone.
Mike, it's endemic to our sound system and a perennial problem for calling in, and we've been unable to solve it.
Oh, okay. I will. It's not too bad on my end, so I'll continue on. But let me ask a quick question before I get started. The folks that are in the room, are these leaders of various organizations?
What is the question? Are they the leaders?
Yes, senior leaders.
I'd say it's a mix.
Okay. The only reason I ask is if we go to the next slide. My objectives here were to talk a bit about the chronic care model history, the work that's involved in doing practice transformation, and then point to some resources that would be helpful for folks. Is that a set of objectives that is appropriate for this group, or is there something more targeted they would like to hear? Perhaps like, what does it take to actually do transformation?
What do y'all think about that? You got 3 bullets there. Would you like to have them go through them, or would you want him to skip any of them?
Go through it.
Go through them? Okay. I think that the thundering consensus is to go through them.
Okay, terrific. Okay, if we can go to the next slide. So I'm not going to talk this group, from what I've listened to for the last 15 minutes or so, and you certainly understand what the problem is. I think of all the bullets on this slide, is the bottom one is the most important, that patients now are beginning to recognize that they can get better care, or they should get better care. And so we're hearing much more from patients now who are empowered to ask questions, get involved in their care, and we've got to catch up to them and make sure that they get the care that they expect. Let's go to the next slide. So I'm going to talk briefly about the two models, and I think the important thing to know is that we're not talking about 2 separate models of practice transformation. I'm going to give a brief history on the chronic care model and show you how it is completely complementary with the patient-centered medical home, and then talk about the areas of work that we've learned over the years that are easy for practices to put in place, and the ones that are more difficult. So let's go to the next slide. I think that all of you understand the history of where we're at right now, that the current primary care system was really designed out of the First and Second World Wars, where it was focused on short-term illness, infections, and injuries. And it did and still does a great job of that. Where the problem is abrupt, there's clear guidelines on what to do, cure is possible, but now we're in this system of people that have chronically ill or multiple comorbidities. Diagnosis is often difficult, treatment is often complex, but more importantly, we now have to integrate the patient's knowledge of living with their chronic condition with the professional's medical knowledge. And that has sort of been the biggest barrier over time in terms of how we do practice transformation. Let's go to the next slide. So what we're trying to shoot for is getting away from visits where the symptoms are addressed. It's the professional that is driving the interaction. The belief that if information is passed to the patient, that's all that's needed, and they will do what they're told. And we're trying to move to a system where the patients are registered in a medical home. We know who they are. Care is determined proactively. It's not based on walking in the exam room and making decisions in that moment based on who's sitting in there. Clearly, we're using evidence-based care, but more importantly, we're using quality improvement to continually improve the practice performance and measuring our performance over time. And as was mentioned in your previous slides, Wes, we need an interdisciplinary team that is working at the top of their license. Next slide. So what do? It's, the future of our healthcare depends on our ability to do this with quality and become more efficient at managing not only chronic illness, but preventive care. And it really does require a commitment of not only primary care, but specialty care to meet the patient's needs in a patient-centered way that has a continuous healing relationship. And as I said earlier, simply knowing what to do is not enough. Practice transformation really requires a commitment from the teams to change and embrace this notion of quality improvement. Next slide. Probably need to click a couple of things, so let's bring all four into place. Yeah, and one more. Thank you. Just a quick history on the chronic care model. In the early 90s, when we were working at the McCall Institute with Ed Wagner, we had a grant from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to look at the literature on chronic illness care and create a synthesis of what works and what doesn't work. That was the evolution of the chronic care model. It wasn't something we invented. It was simply a heuristic device to gather together all the research literature on what improves chronic illness care. We then took the model for the next 5 years and went on the road and tested it in a variety of different healthcare settings, everything from large integrated systems right through to small onesie-twosie practices. And we learned quite a bit about what works and what doesn't work. Something that is important for you folks to know is the federally qualified health centers and the CHCs around the country picked this up very quickly. HRSA in 2000 created the Health Disparities Collaboratives. We worked very closely with them to deliver learning collaboratives for all of the 850 federally qualified health centers. Something that's kind of sad over time. I'm currently working in Indiana with all the federally qualified centers there, and when I ask them how many of them remember the Health Disparities Collaboratives of 2000, no hands go up. So we've had incredible churn in the centers, and the institutional memory of that quality improvement work, unfortunately, has been lost. So another key thing that we have to really focus on is how do we make sure that once we get practice transformation, that it becomes embedded in care in a way that it's just the way to do business. So there's no going back to the old way of doing care. What we found during that work at McCall was that there really was a recipe for improving outcomes, and it involved these four elements: evidence-based clinical care, a QI strategy where the model for improvement using plan, do, study, act cycles was the most successful of the ones we tried. A system change strategy, which back then for us was a chronic care model, but now really is a patient-centered medical home. And as all of you talked about it earlier, that's really the focus of what you should be shooting for with your teams. And then some kind of learning strategy. And there's all sorts of different ways of doing this. There are learning collaboratives like the Institute for Healthcare Improvements Learning Collaboratives. We worked with Don Berwick in the late 90s to create the Chronic Care Learning Collaboratives, which are typically one-year events because you need much more time to change a practice than you change a hospital process, let's say. But it's important to recognize that the learning strategy needs to be as targeted and as thoughtful as all the other transformation work that you're going to be having people go through. So whether it's virtual learnings, combination of face-to-face, modular learnings, all those sorts of things, you need to take those into consideration to be very, very circumspect about what you use. Let's go to the next slide. We'll just look very quickly at a couple of these components, but I really want to focus on the models. Evidence-based guidelines, we'll go to the next slide, is nothing new for all of you, but you have to make sure that the teams, whatever they're working on, whether it's chronic disease, preventive care, that they have the best available guidelines. And where there aren't guidelines, they have the best practice, and if worse comes to worse, the best expert opinion. The next component of the recipe, as I said, is a quality improvement strategy. I personally believe the model for improvement in PDSAs is the best route to go. The main reason being is the PDSA structure, the plan, do, study, act structure, allows teams to test ideas on a very small scale to see if it works in their setting before they jump to implementation. And part of the biggest problem we've had in quality improvement over the last few decades is that jump to implementation only to find something doesn't work. And there's been a lot of resources and times put into that implementation when the same things that didn't work could have been learned on a very small scale with maybe 1 or 2 patients or 1 or 2 practices. By the way, I just have this button here, this picture here, because my 98-year-old mother-in-law spent a lot of time in the hospital because she was falling. We were sitting outside the X-ray room, and for those of you that can't see, the silver round button says push, and then there's a sign above it that says do not push. The reason that was there was the silver button that says push opens the X-ray doors to the X-ray suite. Right beside that button is the patient bathroom. So most people were pushing the button to thinking it was going to open the bathroom door. So they implemented a sign that said, do not push this button. And in the 2 hours that I sat there the first time, of the 10 people that went to the bathroom, 9 pushed that button anyway. So, which of course swung open the X-ray suite doors. So what they finally did was they disabled the button completely, but they could have saved a lot of time and not printed such a nice sign, which they probably had to pay a lot of money for, that said do not push. So in any case, we want an effective quality improvement strategy that allows teams to test ideas before they commit to using them across the whole practice. Let's go to the next slide. When I talk about testing, I talk about the teams testing various ideas. And these ideas come from things like change concepts. And a change concept is a general theoretical idea, not even theoretical, it can be practical, that has proven merit and sound scientific backing and logistical foundation to it. And basically what it does is it stimulates specific ideas for changes that can lead to improvement. Next slide. When we think about change concepts are usually organized in a model or framework. And so we're talking about 2 models here, the chronic care model and the patient-centered medical home. Both of them are filled with all sorts of different change concepts. Back in the 90s, the ones that were important to us at that time was making sure that the health system was organized and had leadership that was committed to good chronic illness care, that it was linked to community resources, self-management support was delivered to patients, the delivery system was redesigned to meet the needs of chronically ill, so moving away from the short acute care visit. Decision support was integrated into care, and clinical information systems were used appropriately, and I'll talk briefly about each of those. The goal was to get to a more productive interaction between an informed, activated patient and with a prepared, proactive practice team, and the goal being improved outcomes. So that's what the literature told us. Next slide. And what the chronic care model emphasized is that in order to become a proactive team, you had to stop reacting to what was coming in the door each day. You had to become more planned. You had to identify your patients, use registries. You had to make sure that some level of self-management support was delivered at every encounter for the appropriate patients. Visits were planned and prepared for, labs were ready, anything else that was needed for the visit was available. Case and care management was delivered to high-risk populations, as we discussed earlier. There were coordinated agreements between consultants and other community providers, and there was a clear referral process to community resources to help patients better self-manage. So that's what the model basically emphasized. Next slide. And I know you folks do have some time constraints, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Wes asked me, of all the components of the chronic care model, what do teams struggle with the most? Self-management support is that piece. We learned back in the 90s that we used a process called the 5 A's, which was, I can never even remember it. It was assess, agree, activate, arrange. In any case, it was very theoretical. What we found is that teams understood the concept of having to work with patients on self-management, but they needed a much clearer, quicker process than what we had originally conceived of in the chronic care model. Let's go to the next slide. And what's evolved since the 5 A's is what we call brief action planning, which my colleague Connie Davis, who's a geriatric nurse practitioner, she was one of the co-developers of the chronic care model. She and a number of doctors around the U.S. developed brief action planning as a mechanism for primary care to very briefly set goals and action plans with patients. And when providers become comfortable with the process and patients understand that you're helping them set goals, this process can result in an action plan in 2 to 3 minutes, which now means it can be integrated into the clinical visit, which was what was a major barrier in work for the prior 2 decades. People just didn't know how to get goal setting and action planning into the clinical visit. That we can talk more about the brief action planning another time if that's helpful. Let's go to the next slide. I do want to just emphasize here that this is a very old study, but it had a very key learning, and basically what it said is that if self-management support is not a consistent part of the intervention with patients over the course of their lifetime, doing goal setting and action planning once or twice with the patient, there's a decay effect. And so, again, the emphasis, and this is what practices really struggle with, is how do I integrate self-management support into the clinical part of the visit so the patients not only get medical support, but they get behavioral support. Next slide. I talked about redesigning the delivery system. We need to think about visits that accommodate chronic illness care. The 10 to 15-minute visit is very difficult to do the work in, but you can plan that and make the time as efficient as possible. And making sure that patients have regular follow-ups, gives care, and you're giving care that patients understand and fit their culture. Next slide. And one of the ways that actually the teams over time taught us about huddling and saying, if we sit down for 5 or 10 minutes, maybe first thing in the morning or at the end of the day or the next day, and just look at the schedule, we can start getting ready for the patients that are coming in the next day. Clearly, if you have walk-ins, you're going to have more trouble managing them if the visits are not on the schedule. But we find that huddling is a really powerful way for teams to get ready for those complex patients that are coming in making sure everybody on the team gets all of the equipment, labs, referrals, and everything in place before the medical provider walks into the exam room and has to try and figure out where everything is. Next slide. You folks talked about care management. I'm not going to go into detail on that. Care management is absolutely critical for that 5 to 10% of patients that are really struggling with their care. The important thing to think about in care management is not only do patients need coordinated care, but they need an incredible amount of behavioral support. So these folks need not only goal setting and action planning, but they probably need motivational interviewing and other strategies to help them with the complexity of their care. Next slide. Decision support, again, no surprises here. You need evidence-based medicine. You want to make sure that there are clean handoffs to specialty care and that there is two-way communication so that specialty care gets the information they need, as well as primary care gets the information back from specialty care that helps them improve the care for patients. And you want to, this is where we have to leverage electronic medical records to their highest functionality. Most of this can be done electronically if the particular software is amenable to a good referral process. Next slide. And then finally, clinical information systems. And again, none of you are strangers to this. We've got to do population-based care. One of the biggest barriers to doing population-based care is that teams aren't paid to do it. So they're expected to create registries, reminders, recall systems, and do risk stratifying, but they're not actually getting paid to do that. Until we figure out a way to reimburse them for that kind of work, we need to emphasize to the teams the utility of knowing your population and how you can plan care and again make the primary care system less chaotic by knowing who's coming in, when they're coming in, and what exactly they'll need. So the EMR is used well beyond just a patient medical record. It needs to be used as a population-based planning tool. Next slide. Community resources, again, you talked about that in your 4 slides, Wes. Social determinants of health has become the biggest concern these days. I mean, it's always been a concern, but up until now, medical practice is not seen it as part of their domain. But now it clearly is. It's clearly part of the patient-centered medical home. So understanding how to help patients with social determinant issues, whether it's low income, low education, literacy, whatever it may be, having the practice ready to be able to hand patients off to community resources or get them to resources is a critical piece of work. The primary care team doesn't solve these problems. There's more than enough support in the community. It's just understanding what's in the community and getting patients to them to those resources as quickly as possible, and getting feedback from those community resources that the patient was actually served and succeeded or was able to access those resources. Next slide. So what does this have to do with the patient-centered medical home? It has everything to do with it. You'll see that I've highlighted some things in red here. The major difference between the patient-centered medical home and the chronic care model is PCMH encompassed more quality improvement and more change concepts than we did in chronic care. Remember, in the 90s, we were focused pretty much solely on chronic care. But what we learned over time was that there are lots of other things that the practice needs to deal with. So clearly enhanced access. How do patients get in for visits? Safety and reducing errors. We did not address that in the model. And it's not because we didn't think of it or it didn't come up in the literature. We just felt it was outside the scope at that time in the 90s. The patient-centered medical home has done a very good job of bringing other ideas to the forefront as critical pieces of practice transformation. Payment reform, we actually did make a conscious decision not to address that because we felt we would get too mired down in trying to deal with payment reform. But as what I've seen over the 25 years since the chronic care model is payment reform is coming. It's coming faster now. And so I think while we're still a long ways away from having the best payment reform, we certainly are moving in the right direction. Next slide. One of the major differences between the chronic care model and the patient-centered medical home is this notion of empanelment. So we pushed this concept of registries back in the 90s of putting together disease registries, comorbidity registries. The patient-centered medical home has taken it a step further and said, you have to understand your whole population. It's not just about the chronically ill or those that need preventive care screenings. It's everyone on the panel. So you need to know who is young and probably not going to come in for care and doesn't need to come in for care, and understand the practice, supply, and demand. That is probably the real critical piece, is for teams to know what the makeup is of their panel and what the demands will be on the provider team based on that makeup. Next slide. Patient-centered interaction, a lot of overlap here with self-management support in the chronic care model. You'll see the same things, helping patients become more activated in improve health-related behaviors through self-management, deliver care in a culturally appropriate way, and again, making sure that self-management, goal setting, and action planning is part of every encounter for the appropriate patients. Now, I do want to emphasize appropriate patients. In the past, you used to hear language of every patient needs self-management support, but that hasn't been our experience over the years. What we find is that if you understand the patient's clinical care needs and you have a sense of their confidence, then you can dissect the population very easily. You can figure out who is in good clinical control and high confidence and needs very little help, right through to folks that are in poor clinical control and low confidence, who might need not only goal setting and action planning, but motivational interviewing to help deal with their ambivalence and importance issues around their health care. Next slide. Evidence-based care. So again, you'll see in the patient-centered medical home, we need point-of-care reminders, clinical guidelines, interactions should be planned with the patient. The one thing that the patient-centered medical home did do that we didn't address was reducing inefficiencies and errors. It's the safety issue, as well as the lean strategy. So the whole lean movement was a very important addition that came along with the patient-centered medical home of how do you make the practice more efficient and reduce the duplication or the unnecessary work that is often going on in a practice. Next slide. Continuous healing relationships with patients. Again, we emphasize this in self-management support, but what had emerged in the literature after the 90s was very clear randomized controlled trials and other studies that patients that saw their same provider, and especially the same provider team, had better outcomes. And in the 90s, we didn't really fully understand that, so patient-centered medical has taken advantage of that literature. The other critical thing, too, is distributing tasks across the team members. Many teams have people that are working below their licensure who want to be involved more in patient care. And when you get them up to the top of their licenses, they actually, there is some early evidence that there's less churn in the practice because there's more joy in work. And you folks had all mentioned the triple aim. You've probably heard of the quadruple aim is now starting to come into the vernacular. And the fourth part of the quadruple aim is provider satisfaction and joy in work. So again, another important piece that we didn't address in the 90s, but is being addressed in the current patient-centered medical home. Next slide. Enhanced access. Access had a rough road in the beginning. It was initially called same-day access. What we found very early in working with Mark Murray and his team back in the 2000s was that if you provide same-day access for everyone, then people with chronic illness care tend to get bumped off the roster, or not off the roster, but off the schedule. That is, they have to call in a couple of days before their follow-up visit in order to get an appointment in true same-day access. So Mark Murray and his team rejiggered access to advanced access, and recognizing that a certain proportion of your panel will have same-day access, and a proportion of your panel needs to have planned visits based on their chronic illness or preventive care needs. Next slide. Care coordination. So again, exactly the same as how we conceived it in the patient-centered medical home. I think one of the biggest reasons that care coordination has not taken off more than it should have in the last 25 years is because of access to care managers. Teams really do struggle with being able to either afford a care manager on the team or get someone with the appropriate skill set that can deliver care coordination. The other piece too is that since teams aren't paid to do population care, they typically don't risk stratify their panels. And so a lot of patients end up in care coordination that really just need care navigation through the system, not really complex care management. So again, risk stratifying is a very important concept that is in the patient-centered medical home that is very difficult for teams to do. Next slide. So, you know, the question we had in the early 2000s was, is the chronic care model duplicative? Is that, you know, is it counter to the patient-centered medical home? And the answer is no. It's very complementary. They both emphasize supporting the patient in the decision-making role, the need for self-management, effective clinical care. The chronic care model redesigns primary care for planned care, where the patient-centered medical home defines primary care as the care coordinator for the patient, which I think was a very important step forward. Primary care is the central point of care for all patients. But both models can take very useful change concepts for practice transformation. And as I said, the models just emphasize different change concepts to different levels. Next slide. What we've learned from those that are working to become patient-centered medical homes is that the role of leadership is absolutely critical. We discovered this in our chronic care model implementation work too, that if senior leadership wasn't on board with the quality improvement work that was being done at the practice level, those practices typically became islands of quality that were overlooked. For organizations where leadership is supporting the team, there is a burden of measurement. It is difficult to do quality improvement, to do PDSAs and collect data and review your data, especially if the team, the frontline team, is not given time during the course of a month to meet as a quality improvement team, review their data, and target areas for improvement. There was incredible diversity across and within regions in terms of care for patients, so not necessarily cultural diversity, but just diversity in terms of dealing with various patient populations, and that was a struggle for teams. The crush of competing priorities, obviously. You know, your work in PCMH can be paramount one day, and the next day, all of a sudden, one single aspect of PCMH becomes very important. So we actually experienced this at Group Health. We were in the middle of implementing the chronic care model across our primary care system, and our CEO overnight decided that same-day access was the top priority. So the chronic care work fell to the wayside, and all resources were dedicated to creating same-day access. Just a while ago, but that does happen. We also learned that among those that participated in practice transformation, there's incredible creativity in the frontline teams. Our learning collaboratives I talked about, the health disparities collaboratives, brought together primary care teams from organizations, teams that typically volunteered to be involved. And when they work together as a group, they come up with absolutely fantastic ideas to transform care. And so it's not just about people like myself or like yourselves being sages on the stage. We really want to be a guide for these folks, a guide on the side that helps them take the patient-centered medical home and create what makes the most sense for them in their environment. The teams do need tons of technical assistance, but that peer-to-peer learning is absolutely critical. Next slide. There's the early evidence, the ARC report, you may or may not have seen this in 2012. There was a lot of articles on patient-centered medical care. Basically, what it was that teams did well making improvements in specific aspects of the patient-centered medical home, but very few actually created a patient-centered medical home. And that continues to this day, although there are certainly exemplar practices that have been level 3 accredited and have gone beyond that. And so I think for your work, you want to find those exemplar practices and have them show your teams how it can be done. Next slide. There's a more recent update from NCQA on the benefits of the patient-centered medical home. I offer this with a word of caution, even though NCQA is not for profit. The articles may be a little bit self-serving, but I think for the most part it's a fairly balanced evidence base of how it benefits patients in the long run. Next slide. And the next 3 slides, which I won't go through, are just resources to help you get started. Next slide. You have great resources at ARC, and I would have, if you're working with specific teams, get them to go to this website and use the tools there. Next slide. Some more work from the McCall Institute that I worked with Ed and company on just in the last few years is improvingprimarycare.org. There's excellent assessment on here for how you can assess your practice in terms of its ability to deliver patient-centered medical home care. And there are 33 exemplar teams across the country, some of which were federally qualified health centers. And your teams can benefit from their knowledge. And then finally, next slide. You have probably what I would say one of the higher functioning quality improvement organizations in the state, in Washington State, that's Qualis Healthcare, and they've also developed a lot of supportive tools around the patient-centered medical home that you can go and look at and download. And I'll leave it at that.
Are we done?
Yes.
Thank you so much, Mike. That was wonderful. I think I've touched on parts of this over the course of our life in the ACH, but nothing this comprehensive and well organized. We have about 10 minutes for questions, and I know that we went through about 40 slides. So if you have questions for Mike on any of those slides, be it number 1 to this last one, let's hear them now. Because again, it's Toronto and it's lunchtime, so we need to help out here. Any questions that you'd like to? Okay, we have one from Wes.
This is not a question, but just an observation. These last 3 slides that we had, this is our training curriculum for our practice transformation navigators. Through the ARC and through the Safety Net Medical Home Initiative, the modules and the implementation guide, guided by Sam. Sam has directed this and brought this to us. This is the training that we have been going through.
Questions? Yes, Susan.
A question about one of your earlier slides. You mentioned the inform and the activate patients as a key part of meeting the improved outcomes that we're looking for. And I recognize that that's probably, that's a huge component of success, which is difficult to, one of the more difficult, the qualitative part. We can do everything to change the health system, but if the individual that we're serving is neither informed nor activated, in your experience, have you developed any best practices on that component?
Did you hear that question, Mike? What has happened in your many years of working in this field in terms of best practices for patient engagement?
I think that for patients that, let me start again. One of the mistakes we made back in the 90s was we thought that you simply needed to step patients through goal setting and action planning in order to get them activated. But the real issue for most patients is confidence. And the research literature actually out of the mental health field shows very clearly that patients that have higher levels of confidence are more activated and have better health outcomes. So what we took from that, and the reason that we came up with brief action planning, is if you get a patient to start with a goal that they identify, that is, they identify the problem that they're having, they choose a goal to work towards and keep that goal nice and small and doable in a week or two. Once they succeed at that, they have more confidence that they can do more. So I'm sort of answering your question in a roundabout way. The way you get patients engaged is by building their confidence. And building their confidence can be done through setting small goals and having them achieve them very quickly. Or motivational interviewing is also another important way of engaging patients to help them deal with the ambivalence that they have around their managing their health and well-being. We all know that we should probably exercise and eat better, but we kind of sit on the fence about it. Sometimes we do it, sometimes we don't, and MI is a way to move those patients. The other important learning is that there are a certain percentage of patients that just will not be willing to do any kind of self-management along the lines of goal setting and action planning. And you have to just let those patients go and wait until they're ready. And typically, unfortunately, it takes acute exacerbation of some sort to get them there. But in general, the focus is on building confidence rather than making sure they quit smoking or exercise or diet more. Then the teams are much more successful because the patients, once their confidence is increased, take over and generally manage themselves from that point on.
Thank you. Answer question.
Mike?
Yeah.
This is Martin. Are you aware of any research that's been done looking at illness cognitions, which are usually divided into helplessness, acceptance, or perceived benefit, and success in the chronic care model?
No, but I'm not the best literature guy to ask. Connie might have a better idea of that, but just on the surface of it, Kevin, I'm not sure I'm seeing anything that would link it to the chronic care model per se. I think those particular concepts definitely link to the team's ability to deliver self-management support. So if they don't address those cognitions in some form or another, they're probably not going to be successful with the patient.
Thanks.
Okay, more questions from the floor.
I wonder if something can be said about, this is what I'm thinking, on the medical home model. It appears to be, to me, it appears to be a catchment group. And I understand as we labor and we integrate, the intention is to expand that catchment group to be able to arrive to the 10% that is carrying the load of 70% of expenses. I don't hear that. I don't see that.
What don't you see, Miguel? You don't see in his presentation. What do you mean by a catchment group?
Right. I not necessarily his presentation of his expertise. I just don't hear language that says how the medical model expands or reconfigures in a way that is able to catch those very stimulating clients that we seem to be missing over and over and over and over again. I love the medical model. I'm fascinated by it, but also I see a limitation, for lack of better words. My catchment on that model has its own limits. What I'm going to do past the limit, because I believe that the population that consumes 70% of the resources lives past the threshold, the limit.
now been denominated as specialty care. So I need to understand how can we contribute to make more available that 10%, or what can we do to bring that 10% into the fold of medical homes? And I know that's a full.
Yeah.
Did you catch that, Mike?
I think I did, and let me know if I don't answer the question properly. The high utilizers, and for lack of a better word, the frequent flyers, I think the most important intervention with those folks, which is inherent in the patient-centered medical home, but it's actually called out some of the change concepts, is this notion of follow-up with them after some kind of emergent interaction with the system. So especially if they're showing up in an emergency room repeatedly, being admitted, those are the folks where primary care needs to ensure that they follow up with that patient after a hospitalization and make sure that, first of all, they understand their medications. They're probably changed in the hospital. They understand their discharge plan, and bringing them in to evaluate their current treatment plan and see what needs to be changed based on the emergent event they had. So that's where I see a lot of traction being made by primary care teams, is in that follow-up piece. Did that address what you were talking about?
Yes, thank you. But it would be great to evolve in concepts and expertise to find out what specifics can help us bridge those gaps. So the doctor in the presentation spoke about coordination of care and be able to capture these folks as they receive a sort of a crisis contact, let it be in the ER or let it be someplace else, and then from that, what would be the most elegant format or model processes to pull those critical folks into primary care and mental health, behavioral health, and so forth. And
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, sorry.
I think Miguel's done, so.
Okay. Yeah, there's an excellent literature on transitions in care by, and especially Eric Coleman's transitions in care model that I think is very applicable to what you're talking about. And again, you'll find that in these resources that it gives the teams change ideas about what they can start testing in terms of making sure transitions of care are smooth and effective for the patients.
Thank you for that literature. Okay, so we have a question from the Medical Director of the Public Health Authority here in the Tri-Cities, Dr. Person. Can you speak up, please?
Sure. I'm just curious, do any of the chronic care models sort of look more at the prevention aspect or expand into kind of more population health-based things, so rather than just treatment or improvement care of people with chronic disease, preventing chronic disease to begin with?
Yeah, it's when we first did the health disparities collaboratives with the federally qualified health centers, they actually stopped calling it the chronic care model because what they found is it applied to preventive care also. So many of those learning collaboratives back in the early 2000s addressed preventive care. So preventive screenings like mammograms, colorectal, pap smears, because they found that the constructs in it were just as applicable to preventive care as they were to chronic care. And I think, again, that's inherent in the patient-centered medical home, that when you look at subpopulations within a panel, one of the or a set of populations you want to look at are people that are in need of preventive care screenings. So the concepts are very applicable to those types of populations.
Answer your question, Dr. Person?
Yeah, I think similar. Have they looked even, I'm just thinking about, is there a way to expand it even beyond just screening for disease, but looking at, what are, again, those barriers that exist in the community that prevent people from being healthy, and is there a way that these kind of collaboratives can address those things within the community?
Yeah, I did. We urge the teams to do that kind of preventive care that you're talking about. One of the barriers is they don't get paid to do it. So to reach out to at-risk populations that may be at risk for disease or injury or risky behaviors, the teams want to do it, but they aren't getting paid to do it, so they don't do it. And I hate to be so blunt.
Okay, no, I think that's reality. One more question, and it's from Becky Gross from Consistent Care.
I just wanted to kind of double back on what Susan and Miguel's point is, and that's we deal a lot with patients that are in their PCP office. You know, they're out in the street, you know, it's a great day, we can get them into walk into that primary care office. So I think some of the issue is whose responsibility is that patient? And, you know, aside from the health plan knows that their number, but in terms of primary care feeling like that's their patient, a lot of times we'll work with primary care providers and well, the patient has to come in, has it established. So nobody really has that ownership of the patient. And I don't know if that's going to be part of this new payment reform, but I hope so, because I'd really like to be able to see that, yeah, this is your responsibility so that we can start at the clinic level thinking innovatively and creatively and have that financial push to kind of develop processes to get out in the community and get outreach and be responsible for those ones that are hard to reach as a primary care provider in a clinic, but yet are the top 5–10% heavy utilizers. So I just wonder if Mike has any thoughts about if there was any effort during this movement to try to reach out and get those folks, or was there any kind of financial incentive to do so?
You catch all that?
Yeah, I did. Okay. The short answer is there was a lot of effort put in by teams that I've worked with over the years to do that. The mobility of those patients is a real issue. So their ability to go see whoever, whenever they want, is a major problem. So delivering continuity of care is extremely hard for those folks. Financial incentives do make a difference. So I did work in a collaborative where federally qualified health centers were reimbursed to do outreach and bring in these lost patients. In those situations, once they got the patient in and the patient saw that provider team as their provider of care, they were able to keep them there, and they were very successful. So I think there are strategies even beyond financial incentives to encourage outreach, especially in rural areas where there's a limited number of providers but more than enough patients, to do outreach and help patients see the benefit of getting care from the same provider. But it's tough work.
Okay, well, I think we're going to just, I've got a question, and I'm sure a couple of you have more questions, but I think we need to give Beth enough time to make her presentation. So could you join me in a round of applause for Mike Heinmark? Mike, thank you so much for teaching us about some of your experiences, and I'm sure that a lot of people will want to go through your slide deck when they have a little bit of time.
Yeah, and please, anyone, feel free to email me if you have other questions afterwards. I'm happy to help in whatever way I can.
Great, appreciate that very much, and stay out of the smoke in Canada, or don't you have any up there?
No, Toronto, we're okay. It's all happening in Northern Ontario, so we're lucky.
There you go. Okay. Thank you.
Take
again.
care, everyone.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Take care. All right. So now it's our pleasure to have one of our own, Beto Lopez, who's been with this group basically since the beginning, and from Virginia Mason Memorial. And she has headed in various names the chronic care effort of the ACH, and is here to basically give a little more detail to the larger group about what's been the experience at Virginia Mason and lessons we might learn from that experience. So you've got about a half hour, Beth? Yes, not on.
Yeah, I don't think I'll need that.
Not now.
Can you guys hear me? Yeah. Bear with me.
You ready?
Okay, so actually, I'm going to move this over here because I can't see my slides. Wow.
Okay, hi. Okay, so Mike talked a little bit about, I'll show you the slide. Mike talked a little bit about this right here. Hey, learning how to use this. About the chronic care model, which I'm really grateful because I think even when we were meeting as a group for the chronic disease and obesity, and there's a chronic disease prevention and control group. The chronic care model was kind of an ambiguous thing. It wasn't really, I didn't feel like we really had a expert that really had, kind of the examples that Mike gave throughout, our journey in EC. So what I'm going to talk about is more down here. So I'm going to go through the community guide. I'm not going to talk about the Million Hearts campaign, but I will talk about Stanford's model and the CBSMT model and diabetes model program that we're using in Yakima. So what is the community guide? And I know it's referenced as an evidence-based program, but it's not. So in the toolkit, it talks about it as a program that you can, take to your agencies and then implement. But it really is a resource center for you to find evidence-based programs. So there's a task force, which is a group of individuals that are coming from public health and research background that really look at all of these evidence-based programs that are out there, and they assess if they are effective in addressing some of these health conditions. So you see this slide. Hopefully it's not very blurry. It's a little blurry to me, but you have issues like asthma, and birth defects, cancer, diabetes, obesity, nutrition, physical activity, mental health. So you can go onto this website and you could research a particular program you're implementing to see if there's evidence behind it, if it's effective within your population. So this is what you'll find if you search for a specific disease. And so for obesity intervention, you have several here. So normally there'll be kind of the closed system that you see on your right, and it shows you if they recommend it or if there's insufficient evidence behind it. So for example, increased water access in schools related to obesity intervention is not, there isn't sufficient evidence that it's an effective program. Or if you look way at the bottom, worksite programs are recommended. So I'll show you another one. Finding for diabetes, and then you have a list of evidence-based programs, one of which using community health workers is a recommended practice through community guide. I wish I would have, if I would have seen the slides Mike presented earlier, I failed to put on there under obesity, they had more community-based interventions, and then at the bottom it had provider interventions. And it would have been interesting for Mike or somebody to give us some feedback, but there was very few of the interventions that were recommended, or there was insufficient evidence that showed that they were effective. And I don't know if it's related to, I didn't dig into it, but I don't know if it's related to physicians perhaps not having the time to really engage in goal setting to the depth that you would want with a patient that has a chronic condition, or if it's more team-based approach, and there was some lacking collaboration. So but go on here, research it if you're interested in finding out. So I will talk a little bit about, so what's asked me, okay, can you present on the programs that your agency has provided throughout the community that are related to the toolkit and that have evidence behind it, and that they've been successful, or some of the outcomes that you've had. So I will start with the chronic disease self-management program, and this is the Stanford model, and it does support the PCMH now that I'm getting familiar with it, as well as the chronic care model, in that it's really teaching about self-management. So these programs, all of the ones that you'll see, are really teaching individuals to manage their disease. And so you're giving them the tools, building their their confidence that they are able to make changes in their lifestyle that will impact them for a long time. So this program is designed for individuals who have a chronic condition, and the chronic condition can be anything. It could be pain, it could be heart disease, whatnot. And it really walks them through making decisions on their care. So you can see what it is. It's offered, it's a 2.5 hour a week for 6-week program. So individuals that sign up for it, normally you want them to stick through this program so they can have the best outcomes. And some of the topics that are included in this program are problem solving, decision making, addressing physical activity and nutrition, exercise, and using medication. So you can see that also falls in line with the chronic care model, as well as the metrics that we're tracking for during the K4 performance with chronic conditions. So this is the evidence behind it. So the benefits that are shown through the research that patients will experience decreased pain and health distress, increased energy and less fatigue, increased physical activity, decreased depression, increased confidence in managing chronic disease, and better communication with a physician. So we've had this program, and I can't remember how long we've had it. I'm looking at my studio notes. We've had this program for as long as I can remember, maybe 10, 12 years. I know we've partnered with farm workers at one point through a grant, a federal grant. And then shortly after that grant ended, we started implementing the chronic disease program through the hospital, Virginia Memorial. And we started tracking outcome data probably 2012, 13, around ED visits, and also primary care visits that were unnecessary. And so we did some data collection. We took a sample of individuals that came to the program, and we looked at their behaviors prior to the intervention, 1 year prior to the intervention, and then we looked at their behaviors a year post-intervention. And these are some of the outcomes that we saw. So we noticed that we had a 28% decrease in emergency department visits with people that participated in this program. And then we also noticed that there was an increase in exercise and fruit and vegetable consumption. So those three, aside from we measured some of the other outcomes that you saw earlier, were very important for us to track to see if there's value associated with the program that we're offering. And it is a program that's offered both in English and Spanish. The curriculum is available both in English and Spanish. And it's offered in community settings with lay leaders that are kind of community members. So the cost is lower in that respect. It is also a very structured program. Stanford has a lot of parameters around it where you have to have so many participants in the class in order to have the class. You have to have 2 educators, and that may have changed. I can't remember the 2, right? And so there's some limitations around this program, but it's a very, very successful program. And there's perhaps a higher cost perhaps a higher cost associated with this program than other interventions that I've seen. And it isn't, that I know of, reimbursed through insurances. So now we'll go to the diabetes prevention program that's also outlined in the toolkit. This program was developed by the CDC, and it's really more preventive kind of a approach to medicine. And I really appreciated the comments that we had earlier around how does the chronic care model, or even the chronic prevention and control kind of domain or project that we're working on really focus on the preventive side of medicine. And this program does just that. And it's a very, very successful program. If you look at the CDC website, 1 out of 3 people have prediabetes, and 9 of 10 don't know that they have it. So the importance of this program is that we really want to partner with providers to help screen for prediabetes, which, you know, I think depending on the provider, they screen or don't screen, or depending on the risk, they will screen. But screen for prediabetes so that we can get more people before they have a chronic condition. And the evidence shows that people that participate in this program will reduce, you know, half of the people will not develop type 2 diabetes within 5 years. There we go. So what is it? So the people that can participate in this program have to be adults. It's not for pediatric patients. And they have to have an A1C less than or equal to 6.5. So there are other requirements, like if you're pre-diabetic, you don't have to be diagnosed with prediabetes. So that we can promote this outside the community. And if I hear and I know that I have gestational diabetes or somebody in my family has diabetes, then I can self-refer to this program. You don't need a physician to refer to the program. It is a program that is a year-long program. So at first I thought, who's going to sign up for a year-long program, right? We got some grant funding to start this probably 5 years, 4 years. Yeah, I always relate to when I was pregnant. Everybody can relate to that. So I think it was 4 years or 5 years ago. Yeah, yeah. And you know, the demand has been really great. We partnered with our providers at the hospital, and we've embedded all of these evidence-based programs into the referral system, which has been very impactful for us. So the physician is able to see a patient that has a chronic condition or a pre-diabetic and automatically refer a patient to us, and so that's been beneficial. But quite frankly, and honestly, the people that sign up even outside that don't have a physician referral, they stick with the program because it's kind of a social support. So you go through this, meet weekly for 16 weeks, and then monthly after that, and it's only an hour, but you do a lot of, you track their weight at the beginning of the program, and you weigh them every single time you see them, as well as they do journaling with around their food intake, and so you have a coach that also analyzes their journaling and gives them feedback every week around their nutrition choices. And then the other aspect of this is very successful is you can offer it anywhere in the community. So it could be place-based, it could be at a housing site, it could be at a church, it could be at a community center. So it really goes to the community versus having the community come to the program. And you know, I'll show you the outcomes that we've seen with the program in Yakima. But the aims of this program are really to help patients reduce their weight by 7%. First, you think, oh, nobody's going to reach that. But we've had about 68% of our participants that have reached that or more in the program, and then the improved A1C, and I'll show you some of those outcomes. As well as it's a self-efficacy, self-management. So just like the chronic conditions program, it really ties into the chronic care model, and the BCMA to our patients really being activated to manage their own disease and condition. They're really getting the tools to be confident in that. So the GCACH program, like I said, we've had it for 4 or 5 years, and these are some of the outcomes that you'll see. So you'll see that we've had a decrease in weight. So patients have lost at the 16-week mark, on average 14.9. 14 pounds, basically. And then at the 16 through 52, they lose about 3 pounds, 2.5 pounds. And then at the end of the year, normally they're averaging about 17 pounds weight loss. We also track medication use of these participants, and we saw that around 10% of participants have been able to stop taking the medication. And so that was huge for internally. The real reason why we're able to track this is because we have integrated system where we were able to look at data. So we were able to look at those patients that we see if they received a stop taking medication order from a physician. We were able to track it from, so they received it post intervention. We were able to track that. So the diabetes management program, I haven't really, this is not in the toolkit, but I decided to add, and I now wish I would have added meds as well, but I didn't. But the diabetes management program, so the Stanford curriculum has an arm that's a chronic, I can't remember, somebody knows, I know, Lisa. Yeah, somebody knows the diabetes, the Stanford, what is the Stanford diabetes management program? I think that's what it's called. Yeah. So, yes, so they have the diabetes arm, and we haven't implemented that program in Virginia Mason Memorial. I don't know if it's implemented in some of the clinics in Yakima, but we haven't implemented that program because we thought it was really, really similar to the chronic disease model. It had one chapter that really focused on diabetes and educating patients on diabetes, but we didn't feel like that was the evidence-based program that we wanted to offer our patients that had diabetes. So we went with another program that's an international diabetes management program, and it's been very, very successful with our clients and in our community. We've had that for about 3 years, and we've been able to track mean arterial pressure as well as, or blood pressure, and then also the A1C of participants, as well as medication reduction, and then some patients have achieved remission of diabetes.
What's the time period here where it's at between the initiation and the outcome?
It's a 4-month curriculum, so they start, thank you, I'll give you a little bit of the kind of the flow of this curriculum. So basically, a participant that signs up for this curriculum will have 4 sessions, and they will complete the program within 4 months. And it's not once a month. It's normally you meet once, and then after 2 weeks you meet again, and then you schedule them after 3 months, and you do their A1C, they follow A1C, and then you have the last session with them, which is the 4-month session. And so what we do is we have a prior A1C that we get from the medical records, or we have them take their A1C before they start the program, and then at 3 months mark we do a second A1C, and these are the results for that. And so you'll see that we have quite a big, large sample, 607 participants that we actually had A1C for, so that we've had more than that, but that we had pre and post A1C. And you can see, sorry, this is 505 for A1C. And you can see that we had a statistically significant decrease in their mean arterial pressure of 1.74, and then also with the A1C, we had a decrease of 1.30 on average for participants. And so when you present this to physicians, the beauty of this is that they understand this, and when you present real data on their patients, they're more apt to say, yeah, this is a program that's going to really impact my patient panel, and that has value for me as well as for my patient. And so our physicians have been really, really proactive, particularly because we have this electronic system integration where they automatically refer the patients to us. So they've been really proactive in sending us patients. Having said that, we still have a huge panel that hasn't participated in this program, and whether it be because they've been referred and they're not ready for that change, they're not activated, so that could be a part of it. And then we also have some, time constraints. Some physicians, may not be able to look at their patient registry and really recognize if, John Doe did not receive a referral last time they were here for that appointment. So what we're working on with Signal Health is their patient registry for diabetics is to have a column where it shows if a patient was referred, and then a column that shows if a patient was actually attended the program. So now a patient provider can look at their panel that day and say, oh, John Doe was referred 3 months ago, but they have not come to the class. And so they have a better opportunity to have a dialogue with the patient, say what's going on. And, one thing that I have to say about, well, let me finish this, but, so when we looked at the data for this cohort, 14.1% of participants actually stopped taking diabetic medication, and it was about 2.3% of the participants actually decreased their diabetic medication. And this was taken from their medical records, and we were able to really track the success of those participants. What else was I going to say? So the kind of the challenges we face with any of these programs, I think one thing we're barely kind of scratching the surface on is the social determinants of health, because a lot of times people don't participate in these programs because there are tons of barriers, right? Whether you offer it in the evening or in the morning or on the weekend, there's tons of barriers for patients to really participate and commit to a year-long program, a six-week program. And the other aspect is that there's a lot of disparities. So I didn't show you those slides, but if you look at the ethnic makeup of, not so much the age makeup, but the ethnic makeup of the participants in some of these programs, granted, Memorial Physicians sees a lot of non-Hispanic population. We have SQHC that see that those participants and or those patients. But having said that, we still feel like there are a lot of barriers for our Hispanic Latino populations, particularly in Yakima, our Native American populations, to have a real big presence in those programs when we do offer them. So I feel like there should be some energy and some effort put into really assessing why participants of diverse groups are not participating in these programs. And granted, these, when you look at the evidence behind them, they've been tested in the communities of color. But I don't necessarily feel like that we, even in Yakima particularly, have really addressed those disparities gaps, and therefore it translates into poor health outcomes for some of the populations of color. So I think those are two areas of deficit or of opportunity, I guess, that we have to really look at root cause, as well as the disparities in health in these programs. So now, questions.
Wait a minute, question you've already spoken once.
But I'm curious about the comment on the potential barriers for implementing these with communities of color. CDSMP has a version in Spanish, Comando Control de su Salud, and it's being implemented in many counties in the state through trainers that are Latinos and bilingual. What do you think are the barriers or is it that specifically for programs different from CDSMP from the South?
You know, I have to say CDSMP, at least for our community, we've had really good success with CDSMP in our Hispanic population. Yeah, and all of these programs are offered in Spanish and English, I would say. So I can't say that CDSMP we've had challenges with implementing in the communities of color. I feel like attendance, we have a lot greater dropout rate with the Latino population with some of these programs. I'm going to look at not being thinking after the childhood obesity program, that's not the case. But so I think that some of the challenges we see, at least for diabetes prevention, which is a curriculum developed in Spanish as well, and then the diabetes management program, which we also have in Spanish, are the social determinants of health. So I feel that there's many issues, right? Like historically, we see that there's evidence shows if you're a white physician that's offering care to a patient of color, you may or may not refer them as frequently as you would to a person of color, if it's a person of color to a person of color. And so there might be those biases interfering with it. I don't know. I haven't researched it. I don't know if that's the case. But the background, I feel, okay, are we having the same volume of referrals for every group, every age range? That's another thing we struggle. We have a lot of diabetes prevention participants that are older, and we want to get them earlier on. So, why aren't we referring patients that are in the 30s that have prediabetes?
But you are seeing differences.
We are.
Engagement pattern.
Yes, and I can't tell you that we've done root cause analysis, and I can't tell you that we know the cause around it, but there are differences and there are barriers. that would be interesting for us to really analyze.
Sometimes I wonder if the barrier is not language, but the message. A few years ago, Washington State did public services announcements on immunization and found that they dropped the immunization rate by about 30% in some communities. It wasn't that we weren't getting the information through, it's that we were overwhelming the people with the message we were giving them. So the message was very important there. Found that with motivational interview. We say, yes, the patient bought in, it's a change, but as healthcare providers, the biggest change I see is we stop doing the, oh, you're going to die of kidney disease, you're going to be blind, you're going to have legs amputated, you're going to have this. If you're one of that 30% who's overwhelmed, you don't want to talk about it. You are not going to go to the intervention. So maybe we need to look at what message are we giving people when we ask them to come in. Because it sounds like your program works. But if we're trying to scare people into your program, there's a huge number of the population that are going to be overwhelmed and aren't going to come in there. And same thing, I work some with CPS. We can force someone to go to see their PCP, but if the PCP unloads all this on them, nothing happens. You'll see a dramatic difference. So sometimes we need to work on the message, not the language. Yes, we need to do the English, Spanish, but we also need to work on the message.
So to address that comment that you made, all the evidence-based programs were designed with communities that they're serving. So the CDSNP program was designed with the input and influence of Hispanic population. And the curriculum is different than the English curriculum. It has more nutrition label reading, and actually I feel it's more complete than the English one, in my opinion, because I think, whether you speak Spanish or English, as a nation, we don't do enough of, really reading labels as well as, understanding what we're putting in our mouth. So to address that issue, the curriculums are very culturally sensitive. I don't know if they've been I guess, what I'm trying to say, with other communities, they've been awesome, but if with other community groups, I don't know that. Maybe other people that are here might have that information. But to address your other comment, I do think that there's, you build relationships with your patients. And so you'll know, I remember my dad, he has many chronic conditions, or several, I should say. And my dad would react to a scare tactic, right? Like that you would say, okay, do you want to see your kids, your grandkids grow up? And so all these scare tactics did work with my dad. I think that as a provider or a caregiver, you realize what's the best approach with a particular patient, and hopefully you're utilizing those techniques to influence those decisions. Yeah, you're going to have 50% of them that are not going to do anything about their care. But you don't never know. We have worked with an endocrinologist that said, you know what, I have the worst patients. They said, nobody's going to go to your class, nobody's going to change their behavior. And he's our highest referrer because he sends them, and it's in a different environment. There was people that are struggling with the same issues that they are, and they're helping one another. It's a different environment. It's a different education. There's not this position of power anymore.
My question wasn't your program. My question is the people who are supposed to refer to your program, the primary care providers, the clinic, the nurses. Do they know the message? Do they know, hey, this program gives you all this? Because I think there's a lot more likely to be buy-in if I'm going to go learn these things, all these skills, than if I'm going to not get my leg amputated.
Yeah, I agree that there is the lack of education around. We try, but it's challenging. I mean, it's hard to get in front of a physician, and then it's hard for them to really understand it the way we do, obviously, because they're not providing the service, and they're skeptical. I mean, unless you show them the evidence, which we have, then they're bought in, and also they see the change in their patients. When they start seeing a change in their patients, where they're basically selling the program for us, the physician starts changing their approach, and oh wow, this is really, there's a lot of evidence behind it. There's a lot of good outcomes of it.
Thanks for the presentation. So I think some of
of you know, but, or may not know, so actually Tri-Cities Community Health, for the last year, we're a sub-recipient, and we actually just started the diabetes prevention grant, the CDC, because of the high, actually, I think the CDC does a study across the nation and identified counties that has the largest diabetes rate, and actually Franklin County was identified as one of them. And so actually, we're a sub-recipient organization called the National Alliance for Hispanic Health Advocacy. And so we've been working on this, and one of the things that that's really important, and you probably know this, right, is that the importance of community health workers, so the education part, right, so that we have part of our patients come through referrals from providers, and through the check, but the others are just based on family history and weight and stuff, and really both the attraction and then the maintenance and continuation of the patients has a lot to do with what they call lifestyle coaches, the community health workers. And right now, unfortunately, the lead at our organization is a registered dietitian, who's great, like with folks, right? So they come, she cheers them on, like, so there's a lot of that. And since it's a year-long program, right, that connection, I mean, really, I went to the training in February in Atlanta, and they couldn't emphasize sort of as much two things. That you have to have a provider champion, right, somebody who's leading it from the provider side, but the importance, the critical importance of community health workers, whatever you call them, that they call them lifestyle coaches, right? And so, so it's really interesting. Like, so we're at the beginning stages of it, but I'm glad to hear that somebody else in here that's doing it. And and our focus is, our goal is Franklin County, and so we're doing the Tri-Cities as a whole. And actually, we're just at the beginning of our first year, so it's really interesting. That's the Franklin County in the area, and it's kind of I kind of emphasize the importance of those community health workers who not only know the communities, but maintain the trust and have the connection. And then right now, part of the program is actually creating stories, success stories, and you have these people who then become your advocates, right? You create champions of those individuals who start to see that change, and then they go out and they're them. So we have to do this for reporting purposes. The most important thing is that then they're going to tell their comadres or whoever, and actually sometimes they come with their husband or whatever. It's kind of cool. And we're at the beginning stage. We're excited about it. It's been pretty challenging, but I mean, obviously, in terms of both preventing or delaying the onset of diabetes, and on the cost side, obviously with diabetes prevention, with paper performance, that's going to be an issue. Actually, the next step is then negotiating with the insurance companies, Lisa, Jorge, to demonstrate that, because right now the grant is offsetting the cost, how for them to pay for these courses, right? Once we have it, that they pay for these courses, and the cost of providing the prevention will be cheaper than having to treat diabetes. So anyway, so we're at the beginning stages.
Let me do a quick mention to that, because it happens everywhere across the state, and as you said, it is true that we don't pay for the service as a government benefit, but many initiatives in many different, just like it's happening to him. There's a grant, we want to implement it, we want to have companies, NCOs paying for it, and we occasionally do it. It's just hit and miss. It's just like depending on who knows somebody, or, we have this much money for this today, but tomorrow we don't have for the next county down the road to support that. So it's really very sketchy because of the lack of a strong articulated program.
So I just want to piggyback on that, because we're also one of those grantees, and we just did our first baseline assessment, and one of the questions on the assessment is, how are you engaging your payer?
Yeah, funny how that works.
Yeah, and I think the other piece too is that Medicare currently now does pay for the DCP program, so I think that's also going to be a really interesting place to watch the efficacy of the way in which reimbursement can happen through Medicare for DCP. I think the other piece too is, rightfully so, how are we engaging? How are we showing the impact of the improvement on outcomes and and then maybe, I think improvement on outcomes is really where we want to focus. Cost savings, of course, is great. And then as we think about moving into certain value-based payment arrangements, where does that flexibility arise for the opportunity to actually pay for that type of program through a flexible payment model rather than a specific billable code or whatever that means?
I have to say, I thank you all for your comments, but one, it is critical that you have a physician champion. I have to echo that, because when we started our program, they help you through navigating that space, which is, it's been successful for us to have a physician champion. And then to address the Medicare component of DP, it's very strict. So it's for Medicare Part B only, and if we're really looking at prevention, we want to reach people that are younger than Medicare age. So I think, and then the other aspect of it is that CMS has these guidelines that you can't charge some and not charge others. So if you're going to charge Medicare population, then you have to charge everybody who comes to your program. So there's so many challenges around. Yes, I'm grateful that Medicare is deciding to pay for some of the participants, but I think in our populations, like in Yakima, in our community in Yakima, it wouldn't be advantageous for us to not subsidize this program from an economic perspective, given that our volume on Medicaid community members is very, very much higher than Medicare Part B clients, and then we would, if right now we see, 500 participants a year, maybe we'll see 50. So you're saying, okay, the value of getting, $15, I don't know how much it is, per class on 50 participants counterbalances the fact that you're not going to serve 450 participants that can't afford it.
Hi, so I've been doing this for 4 years as a master trainer for the diabetes prevention program. And this guys must be the same. You see a lot of barriers, disparities, challenges, and versus your presentation is great. Other thing I'm overseeing is how we see a lot of chronic illnesses, chronic condition participants that come to our classes. How do we link them from them completing a chronic disease self-management class to now being a care coordinator? I think that's where we're missing. I don't know. I think that it's trying to fit them into a care coordinator.
Lisa, can you just tell the group where your program is?
Well, I work for the Vet Technical District. I'm a community health worker, and I'm with the CDSMP evidence program, and I'm the coordinator for the diabetes self-management program there. And we have lay leaders. We've had four lay leader trainings. We've had four lay leaders come through our PhD. We've had Adams County, Oklahoma County, so under Manejo Spanish program. So, where do you teach your classes primarily? We've gone through all 5 cities. We've been in Benton County, in Franklin County, but Benton City, Gloucester, Pasco, Kennewick. We're all over the county.
Are you in churches?
We're in churches, we're in community centers, we're at the villages, retirement homes, health district centers. We partnered with the Lutheran St. Pat. It's been, a great success, but I wish I had, some where I can link these participants to after they finish the 6 weeks and say, hey, this is a great resource for you. Call them. I believe, we're trained as a community health worker, as a facilitator, and master trainer to meet these participants and say they qualify for a care coordinator to come to the home or to visit them because of their disparities or chronic illness.
you don't only get diabetes, we get all kinds of people that are, you know, chronic illness. So.
I think, I'm not gonna be able to answer your question, but I think, having heard, earlier presenter, Mike. Having heard Mike, talk about GCACH and, chronic care model, I think that that's where the linkage will be. I agree, there are tons of barriers around that, particularly people that don't have a primary care home, because you're really, it seems like you're just kind of scratching the surface. Letting them know that they have this, but you don't kind of connect the dots with all the care that they need. But yeah, I hope that GCACH and chronic care model will do that.
So can we give, Beth a big round of applause? In the remaining 2 or 3 minutes, I'm going to put Carol on the spot and Wes and ask them to give a preview of what's coming up in the fall. This has been called the Leadership Council, but it's becoming a bit of a learning collaborative. And I think there's a little more of that plan, but I'd like for one of you two people to sort of tell the group. And then, Carol, I don't know if you want to say anything just about the general timeline from now to the end of the year of the ACH. So, Wes, why don't you tackle the first question?
Sure. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. I mean, Mike and Barry have learned so much today about the diabetes programs that are going on, even patient-centered medical health. I went through the training, some of the training that the navigators went through, but every time I hear this, more and more sense makes sense to me. It also tells us that we're on the right track, because a lot of the stuff that Mike went through, we are doing, and we are planning on doing. So personally, it gives me a lot of confidence. We've gone through 3 of the project areas. We covered bidirectional integration, we covered opioid use, and we've now just covered chronic disease prevention and control. The last area is transitional care. Kevin Martin is the project lead for that. We're hoping in the next month's meeting, we'll have a presentation from him. And to be honest, I'm going to put somebody on the spot here. We're hoping to have a presentation by Becky and the readmission avoidance project through the STEM program. Because I don't think this group has heard that. I think the board heard the presentation, the Leadership Council has it, and they did tremendous work. So we'll be talking about that. Also, next month, Kirk Williamson from the Franklin Health Department is also going to talk a little bit about suicide prevention. So that's next month. Following that, we're trying to come up with an order of presentations, but we believe that we'll be trying to put together a panel discussion about value-based payment. And that has yet to be set up. We would like to include provider organizations, managed care organizations, have a discussion about what's going on the ground, what are people doing, what are their concerns, et cetera. So that will be coming up. And we also want to put together a Leadership Council presentation with the local health improvement networks that have been established or already are established, can talk to the group about some of the work that they're doing. So those are the next 2 meetings that we'll be seeing before the end of the year. And we will not be having a meeting. Did we decide we're not doing a meeting in December?
We typically haven't had.
Yeah, we don't typically have it.
So we probably will not have, we didn't have one in July because of the semi-annual report. We probably will not be having one in December.
Thank you. And Carol, big picture here?
Well, so the only other thing I would add to that is that you heard Mike talk about learning collaboratives. So that's kind of the next evolution, I think, of our project team, that they will evolve into these learning collaboratives. We have funding for workforce training. And so the thought is then to get in some of these national experts, statewide experts to come in and talk about the chronic care model, to come in and talk about transitional care or opioids, so that our providers and our community has the resources that they need to really understand some of these evidence-based models. So we're excited. We haven't tackled that next section yet in terms of actually forming the learning collaborative. We can just tell you that, yes, there's more.
And in terms of sort of the flow of funds and all that sort of thing that's going to take place from now to the end of the year?
So we're hoping to receive good news in mid-October, which would be the result of our semi-annual report. We're hoping that we get fully funded, which would be around $11 million, and then that spending then will go to help, again, supportive provider organizations, our CBOs, and our health partners that we've identified through our CSAs and LOIs to help support the work of the PCMH organization. We're working on a fund flow model that is based on P for P, paper reporting, paper performance and paper reporting. So the way that we get paid is, this year it's primarily through paper reporting, and then in subsequent years it'll be more for paper performance. So hopefully we'll be able to nail that fund flow model down in the next couple of months. And then at today's board meeting, we'll be taking the board to the 4 high-level conclusions that you saw, and hoping to get some more further direction on, so how do we implement some of this care management and this care coordination that we've seen that's so critically important to support our practice transformation efforts. We just haven't gotten quite there yet, So this is a process. We added on a little bit to our foundation in tackling PCMH. We think it was the right thing to do, but it took us a little bit more time to get through that. Now that we can do that, we can concentrate on maybe some of these digital health IT improvements, connecting all of the organizations, working on these network infrastructure issues. And so that will be what we'll be doing for the next few months.
Any quick last minute comments or questions? All right. Well, go and be cool. We'll see you in a month.
Thank you.